Good evening, folks. Thank you so much for coming to this breakout session. My name is Vasu Sankhavaram, and I'm a strategist within HP Software. I work within HP Software's Product Foundation Services CT organization, and what I focus on is portfolio strategy, essentially alignment, looking at themes which cut across a wide variety of themes and functions. So one of the things that people have told me is, I tend to boil the ocean. And so I really like to understand every little last aspect of something, and then I try to condense it. So it just so happens that, what I'm doing, it fits perfectly into our cloud and automation business unit, which I was a part of, because, let's face it, how else do you do clouds? You boil the oceans, right? Little joke, you can laugh. So today, what I'm going to focus on are a few things. I know that this track is actually about cloud standards, open standards, OpenStack, Cloud Foundry, and so on. But what I want to give you is a very quick distilling of what do we mean by DevOps, and some of the barriers. What I call the toll gates, the potholes, and the gridlock. Essentially think about it as the barriers to adoption, barriers to effectiveness, and barriers to efficiency as you're doing your DevOps adoption. And then, finally, I will tie it to some technology. So without further ado, when I started looking at the term of DevOps, exactly similar to cloud, it sounded very cloudy, right? It's very vast. And, I really love this concept of the blind man trying to describe an elephant by touching a few parts of the elephant. And so, is it automation? Is it tools like Chef and Puppet? Is it Git? Is it continuous integration? Is it process? Is it going to be very, very prescriptive, very tight? Is it going to be a philosophy? And so the short answer is ultimately it is a philosophy for better dev and ops collaboration, so that ultimately business needs can be met faster, cheaper, better. Let's face it, it's as simple as that. So it's all of the above, except for, it's not going to be a one size fits all. It's not going to be completely prescriptive right now. So I think, that's something to absolutely keep in mind as you're looking at DevOps. What it's not a person. It's not a role. It's not a team. I think these are aspects which need to be looked at as well, because some of the current adoption problems are just because by calling someone a DevOps engineer and plonking them right in between Dev and Ops, people are thinking that, hey, DevOps adoption is actually happening, and it's not. So this is where what I wanted to do was just give a very, very quick high-level overview of what it is not, what it is, and what it's not. So it's definitely not one size fits all. It's coming out as an outcome of agile delivery, wherein Dev has adopted agile methodologies in order to meet business needs. They've adopted continuous testing, build verification testing, and so on and so forth. And there are other disruptive forces which Ops has adopted as well. It's not that Ops isn't trying to catch up. Ops is looking at infrastructure as service, virtualization, cloud computing, as well as automation. But still, you have a little bit of an orthogonality between Dev and Ops, which needs to be addressed. So as we are looking at this colliding worlds between Dev and Ops, wherein traditionally, Dev is looking at, hey, I need to be faster. I need to be faster. I need to make sure that I can beat the competition. And since they are closest to the business in terms of getting those business requirements, they are trying to develop code faster. But obviously, for operations, it's keeping lights on, which is a very, very big imperative. So this is where DevOps is coming up with the notion of the people, the process, and technology in order to address how Dev and Ops worlds come together. Now, what are some of the problems you actually you encounter even before we try to come to a solution? So to me, when I look at DevOps, by looking at the web companies, the web scale companies which have already adopted DevOps and NoOps, you heard all the fun stories about Facebook being able to do tremendous amounts of deployments. You've heard about Slane, right? They are really chugging along. But how are they doing it? So part of the equation is not understanding DevOps is a barrier, in my opinion. It's a barrier to entry. And so I briefly talked about it earlier, which is if you're looking at DevOps only as a tool chain, as a synonym for either continuous delivery or continuous deployment or application release automation, that's only a part of the story. If the underlying cultural change is not done, wherein dev and ops aren't collaborating together, you will still have issues. If there is no team buy-in, there will be sabotages, let's face it, right? People are not going to do their best, and you are not going to reap the benefits, the full benefits of DevOps. Equally important is not getting the executive leadership buy-in. Let's face it, especially if you have a very complex organization wherein you have thousands of applications, you have different group leaders and GMs who have responsibility over different areas, and especially when those areas overlap, right? If those two teams aren't willing to collaborate together and work together, you will have a lot of headbutting. And again, if those teams are within the value delivery chain, especially dev and ops, again, you're not going to reap the full benefits of DevOps. I think John Willis, if you attended the power panel, he is a very passionate proponent of culture being the main catalyst, main key ingredient for DevOps success. So I'm a firm believer in that as well. Now, that said, you have to start somewhere, right? To get to the ultimate level of efficiency and effectiveness in DevOps, obviously, having the cultural change is very key. I briefly talked about the organizational alignment. If dev and ops aren't really working together, and there's a lot of mistrust between them, and the only way you can do it is almost by having a negotiating body in between, which is called DevOps, an actual physical entity. Maybe as a stopgap arrangement, it might work, but it is not a sustainable model. It's completely anathema to the principles, the core principles of DevOps, to actually have a physical team instead of having a virtual team wherein you have cross-pollination and a matrixed organization of dev and ops. Again, also having rigid processes, especially on the ops side, is anathema it's a barrier to entry when it comes to DevOps. Again, I'm not doing this as a very exhaustive list. I just want to give you a feel for, hey, as you're thinking about DevOps, what are the kind of barriers that you need to think about? So gridlock, again, I look at this as barriers to efficiency. Once you have adopted DevOps, what can happen to derail, essentially kind of grind your DevOps adoption to a halt? Part of the challenge you will see is having too much work in progress. There is enough literature out there. Look at, I think Gene Kim's The Phoenix Project is a great book which talks about work in progress. There is lean development books as well, which talk in depth about how take the lessons from manufacturing. By having notions of Kanban, and by having the notions of work in progress, as well as by limiting the batch size, you are able to reduce risk significantly, and you're also able to reduce the lead time, and thereby improve the efficiency of your overall process. So towards the end, I have some books, some recommendations I can give you, but these are more from a planning perspective. There's no magic bullet here. You can't just look at tools and fix these issues. This is something that, as part of your portfolio, your program, and your team backlog planning, you will need to look at very, very judiciously in figuring out what is the cadence that your team can implement. And based on that, you would figure out how do you prune and control the work in progress as well as batch sizes. Not having processes, again, is a problem. This doesn't mean that we are having a very rigid process. What we are talking about is having the right processes in place, all the way from planning through dev, testing, and operations. The continued siloed organizations wherein you have handoff problems, throwing stuff over the fence and hoping that, the other side is going to catch up, those kind of things will be barriers as well. Also, not having the right set of tools. One of the things, again, I think Chef, Puppet, all these tools are fantastic ways in which you can kickstart things, but you do need to look at a portfolio end-to-end point of view. Do you have the core competence on the IT, on the operations side, in order to take those same Puppet and Chef scripts and be able to do deployments there? Or do you need to look at your existing enterprise-grade applications in order to meet the requirements of your deployment on both the dev and ops side? Look at not just something that you can very quickly adopt, as an open source, as an experiment, but also something which will meet and exceed your needs for the future. So you need to think about, what kind of toolings do you need to have here? So one of the things that we at HP have done is, with several of our key customers, we have created this architecture, reference architecture, which is called the IT for IT architecture. And it essentially categorizes IT according to a set of value streams as a part of an end-to-end value delivery chain. And we have categorized a set of functions that ought to be there. So as you are looking at your investment portfolio, as you're looking at your product and functional portfolio, this is a way for you to baseline what you have and figure out, hey, does this meet my needs for now? And can I use it for the future? And based on that, you need to figure out, what kind of products you need to have. Obviously, from a barrier to effectiveness perspective, the right or wrong choice can essentially either just be a bump in the road, or you can disappear into the hole, right? That's the end of the project. So it's very, very key to adopt the right kind of automation and the right kind of tool sets. It's very, very crucial. Again, something else that needs to be looked at very closely is if there is a pervasive culture of lack of mutual respect between the different teams, that DevOps project it's destined for failure. So this is where it becomes crucial for upper management to have common goals, and rewards for all the stakeholders based on common outcomes. As well as, there needs to be kind of a grassroots movement in order to get people together. Now, again, there are enough change management, literature out there and change management services that can actually help, especially if culture is a problem, if organizational barriers are a problem. So there's also this notion of, we currently have orthogonal purposes for dev and ops. Dev is churning out code, churning out features as fast as possible. Ops is trying to keep lights on. So there are orthogonal purposes. So the two of them need to be aligned. So this is where, there's a seminal paper by Professor Stephen Kerr, which talks about the folly of rewarding A while expecting B. So if we are expecting that dev is churning out code as fast as possible, but ops is only able to do, let's say, 1/10 or 1/50th of the deployment capability, it's a failed exercise. So make sure that the right strategic goals are set to figure out, hey, right now we are doing one deployment every month. Maybe we don't want to be Amazon. Maybe we don't have to deploy every 10 seconds. Maybe every week is what we need. So it's very important to have those strategic imperatives, those strategic outcomes actually articulated by the business before you get into the into automation and all other tool adoption. So the solution itself, the way I think about it is, as with any IT project or as with any business project, this is people, process, and technology. So at the surrounding it has to be the strategic intent, where the business leaders, the business leaderships are actually continuously assessing their current state of affairs and coming out with common rewards in order to figure out, how do you start aligning the people processes at the right level, as well as making sure that the right guidance is given in the case of the technology choices. So the way I think about it is that those toll gates that I talked about, which are the barriers to adoption, those are going to be taken care of from a top-down level by doing the continuous assessment on an ongoing basis. Now, this doesn't mean that every week we have a strategy change. It's just that you have a correct vision which is set so that dev and ops can work together. The other thing that needs to be there is there needs to be a culture of ongoing collaboration. So it's not just the tooling. It's not just coming up with a strategy and hoping to goodness that these people are working together. There needs to be a reward system which is set up for fostering better collaboration between the different dev and ops stakeholders. Now, this is where the change management comes into play, right? Which is around the organization. This is at the business change level. The next thing is around the process itself. Now, you would have heard around application release automation, which is another buzzword which is coming into the industry, right? Which talks about how do you make sure that you are automating your life cycle, automating the release process, and also couple that with the deployment. So making sure that you have the right process overlay on top of the automation that meets whatever has been set as part of the continuous assessment. I think these are the two aspects that need to be looked at from a process perspective. Now, the technology perspective is, I think, the one which has been talked about, quite a bit, right? All the way from, if we look at the entire value delivery chain, the continuous assessment is going to talk about what is, from a portfolio perspective, what is the outcome. The product managers or solution managers are going to be talking about, what are the outcomes which are expected of each sprint or each release. That is then going to be taken by the developers and testers. So the developers are going to code, and this goes into a version control system. Everything that they do goes into version control system. Now, the same needs to be applied even for testers as well as operations folks, so that you have a amalgamation or a nexus between the version control on the development and QA side, as well as the configuration management on the operations side. You also have the notion of continuous integration and build verification testing. So in theory, everything that's being checked in is actually a potential candidate to be at least tested. And the same thing now gets extended onto continuous delivery, wherein everything that has been validated is now a candidate to go into production. And the continuous deployment is just the next logical step, wherein the release is completely automated. With continuous delivery, you're able to deploy all the way automatically up till production, but the production handover is actually a manual step in the case of continuous delivery. But in the case of continuous deployment, even that is fully automated. Now, a couple of things which are very, very key here, which at least from a HP perspective we have recognized, which is having all of this is great, but if the quality is not good, it's garbage in and garbage out. It's a fast fail, right? But it is still garbage in and garbage out. So it's crucial to look at the notion of the continuous testing on the one end. On the other end, you also need to look at the continuous performance, because you need to start looking at how are you rewarding your ops and dev folks, right? So these are based on business outcomes which are very much dependent on technology metrics, mean time to failure, mean time to repair, right? Your deployment frequency, release frequency. So all of these metrics can only be obtained by a combination of looking at the process metrics as well as the automation metrics. So this is where the notion of continuously assessing the performance, both for health and performance, as well as getting a metric that can be tied back to the continuous assessment, so that you can figure out, hey, how do I tweak my metrics so that dev and ops can work together better? Just one example that I'm actually doing in my company is in HP, we have HP software, we have over 150 different software products. And so everyone is focused on their part of the puzzle. So in some cases, you get a little bit of functional area overlaps. So now you have product teams which are actually butting their head saying, hey, this is my area. Don't encroach into my area. So part of what I try to do is to figure out, even before the product releases have happened, have a culture wherein they're at least communicating with each other. And some ways of overcoming these kind of headbutting is to say, hey, what is in our best interest? Is it going to market as HP or competing as individual products? And even at the technical level, talking to people and saying, hey, why don't we file patents together, right? Who doesn't want their name on patents, right? So just those kind of soft engineering skills need to be adopted in order to say, hey, until you have kind of a running engine, make sure that you're using soft engineering. Hard engineering works, but it has its it could have devastating consequences as well to the morale of the team. So to me, if I take a step back, what is DevOps? So DevOps is a philosophy which is dependent on the people, process, and technology aspects. And these are all the things that need to be looked at holistically before you can have a good outcome. So just to move into a little bit more tangible stuff, right? Which is what are the tools and technology that we have from an HP perspective in order to do this. So the way we look at bridging the gap between dev and ops are, again, I talked about the process tools, I talked about collaboration, and obviously based on HP's DNA, we have open extensible systems with respect to quality. We are the market leader when it comes to test automation, as well as automation of all the way from infrastructure, platform, cloud, process orchestration, workflow orchestration, as well as monitoring. So I'm really excited about this. I've been with HP Cloud for over now 6-7 years. So one of the things that we have now done is to come up with an umbrella portfolio, what we call HP Helion. Now this is a portfolio of products and services that will help you to build, manage, consume your workloads in a hybrid IT infrastructure. So you might have heard about our HP Cloud system earlier. Now that was mainly focused on building and consuming some of the hybrid IT workloads. But now what we've done is we are one of the leaders when it comes to OpenStack. So we have put over $1 billion behind OpenStack adoption. We believe it's one of the key standards which will enable you to build, manage, operate your workloads better. So again, going back to this notion of what kind of tooling do you need to look at in order for your DevOps to be successful. The kind of tooling, the kind of partner you need is someone who is able to give you an extensible portfolio which is open and can integrate with the tools of your choice, and provides you with the services all the way from management services to public cloud to financial services. Soup to nuts, we can provide you the entire capability in order to manage your hybrid IT infrastructure. And so we also have all the supporting quality, monitoring, as well as automation tools that kind of round out the entire portfolio. Now, in terms of, I don't want to give you too much marketing fluff, right? But rest assured, if you adopt this is not going to be a journey that you're going to be taking alone. You're going to be taking it with 2,000 other companies which have adopted this. So what I would like to do is very quickly recap. DevOps, obviously it's a philosophy. It's not a tool set. It's not a stopgap DevOps team. It's not a physical entity. It's collaboration to meet business needs faster, cheaper, better. And understanding the DevOps pillars, I've given you one option, the people, process, technology, but have your point of view about what what is DevOps for you? And so from a people perspective, I love this quote, culture will eat strategy for lunch. So if your underlying organizational issues aren't addressed, any DevOps initiative will fail miserably. From a process perspective, my simple mantra is, get a handle on what you have, baseline it, compare it against industry benchmarks, and then you can figure out how to streamline it. Work with experts, work with your partners, right? Talk to experts in forums like this in order to figure out, hey, how do you improve your process? And finally, from a technology perspective, make sure that you don't get into lock-in. Make sure that whatever tools you are using, number one, it meets your strategic intent. Number two, it meets your core competence. And number three, it's open and extensible. So as I was doing this, this presentation, this is the final analogy. I promise, no more analogies. To me, it just was so blindingly obvious that it's all dev and ops. Right now, we've been looking at them as two independent, siloed entities, whereas they are like yin and yang, right? You have the dev yang aggressively, doing a lot of fast, delivery, whereas ops is focused on, hey, I need to keep things stable, slow moving, right? And so you can't look at this as a one-size-fits-all. You can't look at it as, hey, just by looking at one side, I'm going to improve things. No, this needs to be looked at holistically, because one side really influences the other. So with that, I want to thank you and take any questions that you have.
You mentioned a book or a paper on culture change earlier in the presentation.
Yeah, it's a old Harvard Business Review paper by a professor called Stephen Kerr, Kerr. Right. It's called The Folly of Rewarding A While Expecting B. These are our iceberg is melting. That's a phenomenal book. It's kind of an allegory about there's change happening, the iceberg is melting, and you have people who don't want to change. So it's a really, it's very similar to the Phoenix Project, except,
The Phoenix Project I've read.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering about other books.
Yeah. So that's pretty good. Kotter also has other change management books which are really good. Winning Through Innovation, it talks about congruence analysis. So again, trying to figure out, as you're doing your change, especially given that you need to figure out, hey, do I need to have a evolutionary approach or a revolutionary approach? What do I need to do in order to make sure that my organization actually meets, can actually do it, right? It's all great to come up with a strategy, but if it's not actionable, that strategy, let's just flush it, right? So some really good stuff there. The Lean Startup, I think it's a great book. All these books, from a tooling perspective are great. The Principles of Product Development Flow, that's a little bit dense, but absolutely phenomenal concepts in terms of work in progress and batch size. Absolutely wonderful book. Absolutely. So any other questions? Please.
It may be a very basic question. Back on the concept of DevOps, in my dealings with developing applications and getting them out to customers as soon as possible, as we talked about it, what I'm not hearing is the concept of not the operations of the application, but the user of the application. How does that, am I missing the piece when we talk about people, processes? Is the conversation about I'm developing this as quick as I can. I go through a cycle, I come out. Now I throw it to operations or I throw it to a test group.
Right.
Am I on the right track, boss? Is this the right application you're looking for?
Right.
How is the concept of the user of the application, not the operator of the application, the suite pieces of work?
I get it, yeah. I think great question. So I think there are a couple of aspects there. One is, as we are moving away from a kind of a goods-dominated logic approach, wherein you had a provider who would create everything, and then they would throw it over the fence to a user, and the user would figure out, hey, can I use it or not, right? Very transactional way of working. And now we are moving more and more towards a service-oriented approach, right? Service-dominated logic approach, wherein you have the notion of a co-creation, right? Wherein the consumer, in concert with the service provider, is actually co-creating the value. So I think it's taking some time in order to shift to that level, but we're starting to see some of those aspects, right? Especially if we are looking at the APIs, more and more providers are saying, hey, I'm going to create an open set of APIs because I really don't know all the possible use cases that the consumer is going to have. I'm going to create a base set of use cases, and then everything beyond that, through a client application or whatever means, the consumer is able to actually extend it. And now let's face it, the second thing is actually market forces, right? Right? So what would end up happening is this is where the frameworks like SAFe can be looked at, right? Which is the scaled agile framework. So especially, one of the things which changes from the traditional way of doing things, wherein you had maybe 2 years before you would come up with a list of features, right? You would vet it with a bunch of consumers who may or may not change their mind later on, right? And now 2 years down the line, you come up with a product. Is it meeting the requirement? Probably not, right? Maybe not. And now I think with agile development methodologies, you're able to go faster. But the thing is, if you have something like a huge enterprise-grade application, that's not going to be done by a team which is going to fit the 2-pizza rule, right? Which is, it's not going to be possible. So you are going to go with something like a scaled agile framework, wherein you split everything according to your strategic intent, look at it from a portfolio perspective. So this is where the leadership needs to come into play and saying, hey, this is how I'm going to invest. Right? This is where I want to win. This is where I'm going to divest that area. And then the next thing would be to tie that to the programs, which is where you have the releases, which will be tied to the team and the sprints.
Thank you.
So, go ahead, please.
I would add on to that point, though, is that particularly in product development and uncertain conditions, that lean managers can argue that the customer, the end customer, is not at the center of the process, that everything's considered place.
Yeah.
That how many times have you had product development done and how many projects fail because there was this set of assumptions
Yeah.
that went into the use cases
Yeah.
were never approved.
Right.
And millions of dollars later, the outcome is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Kind of my focus were in the process as you go through DevOps.
Great.
That, however the product development starts, where is the two-thirds way through this problem development, it's going to get into operations, and the actual users or the consumers haven't even seen. And how do you know you hit the mark right?
Yeah.
Where does that fit into this?
I think you're right. It would fit there in the planning, and it also fits into the release life cycle, right? Because the release is not just going to be done willy-nilly, hopefully, right? It's going to be based on, hopefully there is a modicum of strategy there in terms of figuring out, hey, who are my key customers? Am I really meeting their requirements or not? So I think that kind of gets into the planning aspect. So but I get your point.
Well, I would argue, though, that you've got continuous assessment.
Uh-huh.
Is if you were in steady-state processes, steady-state products,
Mm-hmm.
then that's a different beast than
Correct.
are you in new product development. And the two books you mentioned, really Innovator's Dilemma as well as Lean Startup.
Correct.
Is you have to determine, are you in uncertain or certain conditions? And
Right.
Lean really is doing DevOps and the process without the underlying what I heard from business is the cloud DevOps is a bag of bits until it becomes relevant to the business. And lean management principles are probably one of the better, or the in vogue method of doing it.
True. True. Absolutely.
So just to comment on that a little bit more, I've run a QA team in my prior life where the requirements I went to one of the lead engineers and he dug through the code to give me the current set of requirements to be able to test that. How do you, how does DevOps address kind of like that whole requirements problem as that's evolving and changing through this rapid development?
I think DevOps itself, I don't think directly addresses it. You do have SAFe addresses it to a certain extent by actually coming up with a meta model on how this needs to be connected. It's not complete by any means of the imagination. From an HP perspective, we are actually working with the IT for IT consortium in coming up with a complete canonical model. Now, what we realized is that there are a bunch of processes, right? You have ITIL, you have COBIT. On the telco side, you have ETOM. You have all these really good, processes, prescriptive processes or good practices, but there's nothing which is actually saying, hey, this is how you need to have your systems of record, right? Your demand, right? At various levels, how does it get connected? So what we've done is this reference architecture, which I'm happy to share with you. So it, part of it you can actually see here. I know it's a little bit dense, but it actually starts talking about, hey, how do you actually connect things together? Now, if you have a canonical model, which the products that you have chosen, they are implementing, and now you have a very clean way of connecting those things, right? Now, the other thing is, there is no immediate substitute for discipline, right? I mean, pretty much what would end up happening is if you have something like HP's ALM, what you would do is you would be, first of all, you would be looking at your epics, your themes, and then underneath that you would have your user stories or your use cases, right? So you have a proper structure for your demand. And that would be tied to your sprint or whatever backlog iteration that you have, right? And now connected to each of those user stories or use cases, as the case may be, you would be creating test cases. And those test cases then are going to have actual test runs in which you would be running those test cases. So now you have a kind of connection between the requirement to the actual test case, right? And also, if you use something like an Eclipse or a Visual Studio integration, right, into ALM with you are actually able to tag as each developer is developing his or her code. They can tag and say, hey, this is the defect, or this is the requirement against which I did my coding. So now, within your version control system, you have that tie-in between the source code as well as your requirement or defect ID. So you immediately can start figuring out, hey, when I do this release, I'm not going to run my entire 100 or 200 different test cases. I'm going to run it to very, very laser-focused, targeted set of regression cases.
One of the things, though, you're talking about a well-defined process for people like following the rules.
Yeah.
And I work in an industry where people are like pushing it out the door yesterday to capture a
Right.
market condition or
Right.
something like that. So it seems like process is really
Process is very important as well. And let's face it, at some point the technical or process debt is going to catch up. Right? It is going to catch up. I think I've actually taken more than my fair share of time. So I thank you so much. I'll okay, go ahead.
How do you see process debt in that development? How do you know that you're beginning to see process debt?
I think part of the equation is to me, one of my pet peeves with DevOps, right, and even Agile, is this notion of people think, hey, I don't have to do any documentation anymore. That I can get away with not doing documentation, not doing the right level of documentation, right? So to me, part of the equation is, coming up with some level of run books, right, which can be not very exhaustive, but at least something which would say, if I'm a brand new person coming into the team, I know what to look at, right? I know how to do stuff. Another indication might be that I actually have a tool chain which is orchestrated, right? If I have something like a continuous integration and continuous delivery and application release automation, I think those are indirect ways in which I know that there are processes in place. Actually, you asked a great question. I need to think about it a little bit more.
I think it's a good handle on technical debt. I don't think it's good.
Right. Let me think about it a little bit more and give you a better answer. Okay. Thank you so much.